Kal Kadosh, how are you? I hope all is well. I wanted to share with you a beautiful idea that I saw in this week's parasha, connecting Megillat Echa and the parasha of Devarim, this week's parasha. Devarim always precedes, parasha of Devarim precedes Tisha Beav. There on Tisha Beav we read Megillat Echa, and in Devarim we also read Echa esa levadi torchachem maasechem v'rivvechem. So what is the correlation between these two words, the connection between them? So once actually happened, there was a story with the Balatanya. The Balatanya was once in a hidden jail because in the Soviets, they went and they put him in jail in this is St. Petersburg, the capital. And the one in charge of doing all this investigations, he saw him that he was completely learning Torah. His mind was very deep. He himself was a person of a very big intellect. And this minister, he comes and he starts asking the Balatanya questions. And even in Torah, and he told them, I'm going to ask you a question. Will you be able to answer me? He said, for sure, ask. So he asked him, what does it mean in the beginning of Bereshit, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and he asks, he tells the Adam HaRishon, Ayeka, where are you? Where are you in this world? He says, one second, he says what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not know where Adam HaRishon is? What's he asking? What was the question? So the Balatanya comes and he tells him, do you believe with true belief that the Torah is eternal? And in every single generation, and every single human being, it applies to them. Do you agree and believe in that? He said, of course I believe in that. So he says, so I'm going to tell you the explanation of the Pasuk. He says, you should know the explanation of the Pasuk is that every single time HaKadosh Baruch Hu will come and point to every single human being, and he will ask us a deep question. And the question is, Ayeka. Where are we in this world? We know that every single one of us has an amount of years and days in this world. And in every single time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just looking forward that we should maximize our potential and we should actually be able to succeed in what we're doing. And therefore, where are we in this world? Where are we in our own physical, not in the physical world, in the spiritual world as well? How many years has gone by? And what did we do with those years? What did we do with everything? This, in essence, was something incredible. That the Tsar, this general, went and he said, bravo. So, wow, what an incredible thing. After hearing other chidushim also from the Balatanya, other novelties, he comes and he goes to the Caesar and he tells the Caesar, listen, you should know this man is a very holy man. For sure, whatever they said about him, whatever libels and things that they said, forget about it. It's 100% false. And they let him free. When we read this pasuk, this Ayeka, really be'emet, there's also another connection between Ayeka and Echa. Besides the fact that they're the same exact letters, but just different vowels, different nikudot, there's something deeper in it. Do you know that there's a minhag by Ashkenazim that this pasuk in Devarim, which is the beginning of Aliyat Sheni, or some people do it in the second pasuk, because we start a pasuk beforehand, just that way we don't start with something negative. They actually read it with a tune of Echa. So the Levush explains the reasoning why. He says, because since Devarim is the Tochacha, is the rebuke and the reproach that Moshe Rabbeinu came and gave Klal Yisrael, so he wanted to connect it between the Chazon, the Haftarah of this week's parasha, which is the Tochacha, the rebuke on the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. We know that these three parashiot, the 3 weeks, we read 3 special Haftarot. And every single Haftarah had to do with calamity, something negative. They are called Tlata de Puranuta, the 3 of bad things. 3 Haftarot, the things that happen. And therefore, there's a minhag, especially by Moroccans and others, that they should even sing it with a special tune. More of a sad tune. A tune which is actually going to illustrate us and to show us all this reproach and the rebuke that we're supposed to receive. So therefore, since right now we wanted to have the connection between Chazon, which is Haftarah, the rebuke, and Devarim, which Moshe Rabbeinu gives his final rebukes to Am Yisrael, And he starts telling them, but listen to the Midrash. The Midrash Rabbah says, Amar Rabbi Avhu b'shem Rabbi Chanina, Ma Adam Arishon, just like by Adam Arishon, I made him enter into Gan Eden. I commanded him, and he went against my words, and I divorced him, I threw him out, and I told him, Ayeka, so to my children. I brought them into Eretz Israel. I commanded them, and they went against my will. And again, I'm going to divorce them with the word Echa. So there's now also a correlation, a connection between Ayeka and Echa. Now, what exactly does this mean? Which means like this. The Midrash is teaching us that just like by Adam Rishon, that it was on an individual level. It's a human being, one human being, an individual. And by him, he went against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, Ayeka, where are you? What brought you this sin? Where was the cause? What caused you to fall? And pay attention to that. So too is the exact same thing beforehand. Ad kedei kach, until so much that the Zohar HaKadosh says that the word Ayeka, HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Adam Arishon the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. And he started crying because of Echa. Now, why is that? It's because a person has to see and realize, internalize, what brought me here. Remember that the word Ayeka is where are you? Echa is how did you do this? How? What brought us this? Ayeka, where are you now? What are you doing with your life? Echa is what, where? What did happen? Where are you? Which means, how did you get to such a level? And therefore it comes out that that is the first step of the tikkun. The first step of any remedy, of any fixing up, of repair, has to be that we recognize where we are. We recognize what brought the sin. We recognize where we're holding. What do we need to do in the future? How do we fix it? Because only there we will be able to actually continue. And therefore it comes out that even though by Adam Rishon it was on an individual level, now it comes to Am Yisrael, and now it's on the general level of all of Am Yisrael. And now we come and we say to all of Am Yisrael, where are you? What happened to us? How do we get to such a place? And that's why it's so important. But something even deeper that we have to actually understand, the Shvile Pinchas comes and he brings another beautiful midrash. In the Echad Rabati, the Akdama Yud Aleph, it says, Ilu zachitem, if you had the merit, you would have read in the Torah, Echa Esa Levadi, which is this week's parasha. But now that you don't merit, you didn't merit, now you're reading Echa Yasheva Vadad. Now you're reading Megillat Echa. So now you hear another correlation here. Not only between Adam Rishon, right, which is again, Adam Rishon, Ayeka, and Echa. Now between the fact that we didn't read Echa in this week's parasha, that's why we're reading Echa in the Megillat Echa. We have the destruction. And the question that we ask ourselves is, what does that mean if we didn't have the merit? Everybody reads it. Parashat Devarim, everybody reads Parashat Devarim. And there we read Echa Esa Levadi. So what exactly is the kavanah in that? So Chachamim come and they say the kavanah of the Midrash is that we saw in Parashat Chukat that when Aharon HaKohen passed away, all of Bnei Israel were crying. Men, women, and children. And the reason why is because they went and he used to be Marbeh Shalom, whether it was between a husband and wife, whether it was between people, he was always making Shalom. And that's why Hillel Hazaken said in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Heveh mitalmidav shel Aaron, be like the students of Aaron, Ohev Shalom v'rodef Shalom, person that loves peace, he pursues peace, he loves everyone and brings them close to the Torah. You remember we once mentioned that the Avodah Natan and others, that they said that there were 80,000 people that came out with the name of Aaron. Because every single time that Aaron HaKohen did something with peace, people would call their children on his name. This is actually connected to the Daf Yomi of Natan Bavli, that he saved a few children. We just read it 2-3 days ago, that he saved a few children from death because of the Brit Milah, and they called the child on his name because of he saved them. Aaron HaKohen, he was saving Am Yisrael. Why was he saving Am Yisrael? He was always making peace between them. Now listen to Rashi on the Torah. Rashi says, what does it mean? Echa esa levadi, torchachem u'masachem v'rivechem. How am I going to carry the burden on my own, says Moshe Rabbeinu. Torchachem, your toils. Masachem, your burdens, v'rivechem, and your machlokets, your quarrels. Says Rashi, he brings a midrash, Torchachem, melamed shayu Yisrael tarchanim. They were making fights. They were coming and trying to go to courts. And they were saying, I'm going to bring this proof, and I'm going to bring the other proof, and I'm going to bring this one, I'm going to add Dayanim, and I'm going to add this. Moshe Rabbeinu was giving them reproach. He was telling off Am Yisrael. And he tells them, why are you guys constantly fighting? Why is everyone constantly going to war, to battle? Why don't you stop? And there's some things which are so small, so minute. Why? Beforehand, I had Aaron HaKohen, that Aaron HaKohen was being Marbeh Shalom. He was making a peace between everyone. So that helped out the situation. But now if I don't have that, so what am I going to do now? And now we actually understand what was going on. Moshe Rabbeinu understood, and he had this nivuah, that because we didn't listen to Echa Esa Levadi Torchachem Masachem Ribechem, because we didn't listen, and we were still fighting, and we were doing our quarrels, the Bet HaMikdash was going to be destroyed. And that's why it was written in the Midrash. If only we would have merited to listen, we would have been merited to read these words of Echa Esa Levadi, we would have realized. We would have said, Ayeka. We would say, where are we? How do we get to such a situation? We would have been able to fix it, to rectify it. But the fact that we weren't Zoche, the fact that even though every single Shabbat, every single time Parashat Debarim comes, we read it. Everyone reads it. Who doesn't read it in the Tzibur? Baruch Hashem, we're still able to read the Tzibur. There's no problem. Even with the virus and everything else, we could still read it. But we're not reading it just to read it. We have to internalize it. If we were zoche to read it and internalize what we're reading, we wouldn't have the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. We wouldn't have all these things. And that's why it's so important just to realize what it is before Tisha Beav, we read this parasha. This parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to teach us, whether it was not only his rebukes that he gives at the beginning of the parasha, not only is it the rebuke of the chazon, which is haftarah, something a little bit deeper. He comes and he says, if you guys read this pasuk, Echa, you won't need to read Megillat Echa on Tisha Be'av. If we rectify and we realize, where are we standing? Ayeka, where are we? What brought us to the sin? The sin was brought because of Sinat Chinam. The sin was brought because we're fighting for petty things, for nonsense. You know, it just happened recently that there was an argument. There's always arguments. People always will argue. But it depends how you argue. It was something to do with how do you start, whether it's Chazarat HaShatz, how many people do you need? And we went into the halakha, there's machlokot, right, left, center, 9, 6, 7, whatever the case is. I was going to tell them afterwards, arguing over halakha is not only that it's permitted, it's a must. It's Torahi and we need to know halakha. Will there be machlokot at the end? Will be differences of opinions? Always, 100%, no problem. But how do we argue is the question. How are we going to confront the people? Does it become that we're just out there to get someone and that I'm always right? Or is it that I want to see the truth? Is it that I want to find out what be'emet is halakha? And if he's right, I'm even happier. Why am I going to be happier? Because if you remember, I once mentioned that Rav Chida says if you have an argument and you're wrong, you should jump out of joy. Says, you know why? Because if you're right, you didn't gain anything. If you're wrong, you just gained something. You now know the truth. You learned something. If you're always right, you never learned. So therefore, the opposite, you should be happy. And that's the difference. The difference is the approach of how we do it. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Even when we're going to argue, how do we argue? Is it just lekanter? Is it just to come and to always start fights, to start quarrels? Or is it no? That when we're coming to argue, it's always done with derech eretz. It's always done with, in order to learn the emet, and to understand that there's a second opinion, understand that there's other opinions as well, and to accept those opinions. Remember, every single tribe had their own derech and avodat Hashem. I respect the tribe of Reuven Reuven is going to respect my tribe of Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and continue going. And each one, nobody's right and nobody's wrong. They're all correct. Every single path is the path to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I just hope that we're able to internalize this message, to understand that every single day HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he comes and he tells us, or when we read it in the beginning of Bereshit, and he says, Ayeka, where are you? That wasn't a question just to Adam Arishon. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not write the Torah as a storybook or a history book to tell us, by the way, I'm asking Adam Arishon where he is. He's asking you and me and every single other Jew. And he's asking it in every single generation. Where are we? How did we get here? What are we doing to fix it? Because that's part of the Tikkun HaChet. That's part of fixing all our mistakes. Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to be zocheh, that we should listen this week's parasha to Echad Levadi Torchem Asaychem V'Bechem, to realize that the majority of the quarrels between us, they're not even worth it. It's not even important. We should just get rid of it. Because only in that merit, when we're zocheh, to internalize that message, we will be zocheh that we don't need Megillat Echa. We don't need Tisha Beav. Bezrat Hashem, instead of making it that it will be the saddest day of the year, Bezrat Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu should change it to a moed, like he says it will become, Bezrat Hashem, when Mashiach comes, and Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to be zocheh to Mashiach Tzidkenu Mimirav Yamenu. Amen. Bezrat Hashem. Kol tuv v'atzlacha and Shabbat Shalom.